Well, hello and welcome to More to the Story with Molly White. I am so happy that you joined me again today. Before I get into the topic for today, I want to welcome my awesome, wonderful co host, Mary Browning.
Hello, Molly. It's so good to be on the program again today. I'm excited about our guest.
I am too. But today, Mary, we're going to be talking about abortion and men. And we've had many men on our podcast sharing their personal abortion experiences and how it impacted them and their relationships. Because abortion just doesn't hurt one person or affect one person. It affects the mother, the father, the baby. Then it affects the siblings of that baby, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, and we can go on and on. But, men don't really get a whole lot of attention to this matter or a whole lot of recognition in this industry or in the society about how it impacts them. So today, our special guest will talk about abortion's negative impact on men from his research studies. But before we introduce him, Mary, please give our warning and helpline number.
Yes, yes. If you're listening today and you find yourself having a reaction to the information, it could be that we call that a trigger. That it's an invitation. We think of it as an invitation to another level of healing. You can call the H3 helpline at 866-721-7881, whether you're a man or a woman, and they will put you in touch with someone that has abortion in their past. And also they will connect you with healing ministries. So thank you, Molly.
Thank you, Mary. Now, Dr. Jeff Pauls is a researcher with the Vitae Foundation, and his work has helped establish Vitae, am I saying that correctly?
Vitae.
As Vitae, as a prominent research authority on pro-life messaging. And he does have a wonderful resume. So, Jeffrey, why don't you just come on and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about you, and then we'll start talking about your research with men and abortion.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Molly and Mary, for having me. I'm excited to be here and to talk with your audience and share a little bit about what Vitae does and what my role is there. So I got involved at Vitae thanks to a prayer that I prayed about 20 years ago or so. And so I always tell people when I share this story, I say, be careful what you pray for because God will take you up on it or show you a way that's even better than what you prayed for. So the prayer that I prayed so many years ago was, God, show me a way that I can be more involved in the pro-life movement. How can I help the innocent unborn? In what ways, please help me, show me some ways that I can be more involved. And at that time I was doing some pro-life volunteer work with an organization called Life Runners. And so I'm a runner. I enjoy, doing marathons and triathlons and such like that. And this was a neat organization that wore a bright blue shirt with Life Runners and Jeremiah 1:5 on the back. And it said, remember the unborn. And it was basically just a way to what we called witness with fitness or witness through fitness, and we would bring that message, the pro-life message, to the roads and the streets of all the marathons in the big cities and wherever else we were running. So it was a neat opportunity, and I enjoyed doing that. But I felt like I wanted to do more, and I was called to do more. And so, but I was a teacher by trade. I loved teaching, and I taught for most of my career. And so that's what I was doing when I prayed that prayer. I was close to finishing my doctorate in education at that time when I was doing that volunteer work. And I just assumed that I would, either I'd been doing some assistant professor work at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and I'd previously taught in high schools and junior highs before that. So I just kind of assumed that I would either continue teaching at the high school or college level or eventually become a principal or a superintendent, something like that. But like I said, be careful what you pray for, because within a year I was working full time at Vitae Foundation, a national nonprofit pro-life research and messaging organization, and I loved it. So God definitely brought me to the place where I feel like he wanted me and needed me, and so I've been able to use some of what what I learned through my doctoral program with research and then also education. So I share, just doing this kind of thing. I use my background in education to try to teach a little bit about our research, and then just conduct research. And, with the data analysis work that I learned how to do at the University of Missouri St. Louis, I put that to use for the pro-life movement. And it's just been a great blessing for me to be able to work in this industry and work in, to have the opportunity to, we kind of sometimes talk about how we want to try to put ourselves out of business so we don't have to, continue to fight against abortion. But we've kind of realized over the years that, this is something that even if, even now, now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, I mean, obviously we're still fighting it, from the
Yes.
state level and in different ways even
Yes.
more. We think that there always will be a need for, organizations like ours to support women, first of all. And we are definitely a woman focused, we take a woman focused approach through our research, and we can talk more about that. But women, men, children, basically to support, anybody, facing an unexpected pregnancy, a difficult situation, that even if abortion was made illegal, there's still going to be, pregnancies, unexpected pregnancies that are difficult or scary for women, men, and that sort of thing. So, and same thing like with pregnancy centers. The reason why they're so effective and so important is that, it doesn't, it's not necessarily a legal thing. It's a humanity thing of helping someone in a difficult situation or a scary situation, that sort of
Yes.
thing. So yeah, I've been at Vitae now for a little over 7 years, and have been the director of research for several of those years, and have just had the opportunity to really share what we've done at Vitae through our research with people all across the country. And so I'm honored and excited to share it with you all and your listeners and viewers.
Thank you. That's awesome. I do know that be careful what you pray for because God does answer prayers in sometimes most
Yes.
mysterious ways, but He always puts you right there where He needs you and wants you and can use you the best. So, that being said, I know pre show we discussed you did the latest research that y'all did was on abortion and its impact on men. And so, I kind of want to start there and then I want to go a little deeper to some of your other research and their findings. But because this is something that's not really talked about a whole lot. And there's probably a lot of information that you have discovered that we don't know. And so what did you find the most, I don't know, the most revealing or maybe even shocking thing about abortion in men through your research?
Yeah, that's a great one. There's so many interesting things that we find in every one of our research studies, and I will I'll answer that, and but I'll leave everybody on the ledge just a little bit. First, I'm going to tell everybody just a little bit about kind of how we do the research, and then I'll jump into what I think I did a presentation recently on kind of the 5 surprises of the research, and I'll try to pick one of those as kind of the most shocking part of the research. But our research is unique in that it's what we call right brain research. It's an emotional, qualitative type of research. So these are long 2-hour interviews, one-on-one with a respondent or an interviewee, and we find find people that match the criteria that we want to interview. So in this case, they were all men between the ages of 18 and 45. And they had to meet the criteria of being in the movable middle. So this is men that were not strongly pro-life or strongly pro-abortion, and yet and then we had 3 segments. So we wanted to make sure they had faced 3 groups of men, so we could kind of compare their experiences. So we had the first group of men were men who had faced an unexpected pregnancy with their girlfriend, wife, significant other, and told that woman, "I'll support you whatever you choose." So this was something that we had run across in our previous research with women who had said this was often what they heard from the man, that he would support, he said he would support me whatever I chose, he would support me. But unfortunately, a lot of times they would talk about how that just did not feel really supportive, that it was kind of like pushing it back on them. That decision was all on them. And that it didn't, a lot of times if she was kind of not knowing what to do, she felt really deflated when she heard that because it came across as, well, you obviously must not want to keep this child. You're saying like, if it's not that big a deal to you, most of them really said that they would have much preferred him to say, have been excited, about it. And that would have really helped them, and so, and some of them that didn't necessarily like, were very scared and didn't necessarily know what to do, or maybe were leaning towards abortion, even they would have said, well, it would have been, it just wasn't, that wasn't authentically supportive. Like he thought, and so from our research, we actually found that most of the time he thought he was being supportive. He's kind of been conditioned to say that, to just, understand, well, it's her body, her choice. I'll just be there in the background and, whatever she decides, I'll roll with, kind of thing. But anyway, that's the kind of interview, sorry, that was the first group of men that we interviewed. The second group of men were men that chose a much stronger response to that situation. They too had to have faced an unexpected pregnancy, but interestingly enough, we combined this group with men that had said, I am excited. I want you to have this child. I will be there. I'll be the best. I'll be I'll be the dad. You'll be the mom. We'll make this work. Whatever he said something strong to indicate that he wanted the child. But interestingly enough, we included in that same group, and this is surprising maybe for a lot of people to hear, but we also included men who said, you need to go get an abortion now. I want you to get an abortion. So basically we were looking for men who were very kind of wishy-washy and saying, I'll support you whatever you choose, which we knew we would have an easy time finding, because a lot of the men or the women that we interviewed said that was one of the most common things they heard. Well, the second group of men, we wanted that group to have made a much stronger reaction, whether it was strongly in support or strongly in pushing her towards abortion, because we wanted to look and see what made them say that, what made them take a strong stance. And we're going to compare that then to the ones that said, I'll support you whatever you choose. And then we had a third group of men who had not faced an unexpected pregnancy, but had and were still, movable middle, but they had enough of a experience it related to unexpected pregnancy or abortion, or just how men, they had enough of an interest and an experience. They didn't have to have actually experienced unexpected pregnancy, but they knew that, their sister had, their child had, something like that, where they could talk about it emotionally, but they personally hadn't had that experience. So we kind of wanted that alternative. So those were the three segments that we interviewed. And as I said, our research
Jeffrey,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I think Mary had a question. Did
Oh,
you
I'm
have a
sorry.
question in there, Mary?
I did have a question. It's just, how did you find these men?
That's it. That is an important question. So we contract that part of the process where there are research organizations around the country that have brick and mortar buildings in different cities, and they will conduct research of any type. And so they have a list of people that are willing to come in and participate in a focus group, in a one-on-one interview, in a, any sort of research. And they have, this list of people that they can call or, go through the computer. And then they'll actually, set up the appointment and everything. And then they'll, they they advertise, or they know where they're located, and it's, in a nice, safe place with, a very comfortable, interview room where, we have certain criteria that we require. And so we do need like a one-way mirror to where, some of our staff can kind of actually watch the interview take place, and has to be audio and video recorded and everything like that. And so, but we have a very strict kind of set of, criteria that we give that location or that company, and then they'll actually do the calling, and they'll make sure that they fit, they check all those boxes basically. So yeah, that's how we find them. And we'll get like the the variation in age and race and in this case, not gender, because we wanted all men, but religious affiliation, education. So we want that to be pretty broad so that we can kind of, and then we really are specific about like those segments. So that's where we really get granular and we go specific on who we want. But otherwise we say we want, a mix that represents kind of the makeup of, the United States in general with, age, education, job, um, race, religion, all of that sort of thing.
So, what I want to recap from what I understand you were categories you were listing is I'm going to say ambivalent. The first group was just ambivalent about the pregnancy, whatever you want to do.
Mhm.
And I'll support you one way or the other. So, that was the first group that you looked into. And then the second were kind of the same. They were felt very strongly about the pregnancy, but one was very strongly excited, wanted to be a father, was looking, probably already looking forward to being a father, wanting to support the mother and have this child. But then the polar opposite of that was the man who was probably afraid, uncertain, whatever, that he really was pushing the mother to having an abortion. So those were the three categories that you interviewed or you looked at. I guess
Yeah.
you interviewed
So
them.
yeah, we did interview them, and the first category was the one that were kind of ambivalent, or I'll support you whatever you choose. And then the second category was actually both of those, the ones that were the polar opposites. They comprised that second category. And then the third one was actually ones that hadn't faced an unexpected pregnancy. So they were ones that we were kind of interviewing just about like from a cultural perspective, how do they see, and again, not necessarily having a personal experience, but and they were close enough to the issue that they could respond emotionally. And they had maybe they had an experience that was a secondhand experience, or that they had developed enough thought and interest, I guess, in the issue that they could respond well to that sort of thing. Yeah.
And so then are we going to move into the five surprises? Are you ready to go there yet? Or
Yeah,
is there?
almost. I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about the research process. So when we sit down with them, then they're actually on a couch or a chair where they're very comfortable. They've got their eyes closed, and and we're going to actually take them into their mind's eye. So we're going to actually have them go deep into the time, and we have a series of visualizations that we take them into. So even ones that didn't actually experience an unexpected pregnancy, maybe we would take them like the first visualization that we always do is relaxation. So we have three major parts of this interview. We have relaxation, we have visualization, and then we have repetition. And so we'll have them relax and go to the time in their mind's eye when they were most relaxed in their life. And we're going to start to have them describe that, okay. And they're, where are you? What do you see in front of you? How to respond? Because we're going to be doing this with them for 2 hours. So we want them to kind of follow our lead as the interviewer, but we also want them we're also literally doing something very effective with the relaxation where we're training them to kind of follow our lead. B, we're getting them actually relaxed so that they can, be in a place where they can talk, more intimately and more personally and that sort of thing. And then thirdly, we're like training them in the method so that they're not just describing like, oh, I remember this. They're actually there at the moment, reliving what they experienced. And again, it can be a little bit more difficult if they literally didn't have an unexpected pregnancy situation. And we did find that in this study that those in that third category, we had a little bit harder time getting them to like be really visual when we get into the visualizations and helping them like relive it. But a lot of times when we would go into, things not associated with the unexpected pregnancy, that things like fatherhood or masculinity or providing and protecting for the family, like all of a sudden those are things that we could get really personal about and that sort of thing. And again, we weren't focused. We were focused pretty, we had several topics that we wanted to address. And so it wasn't just abortion and unexpected pregnancy, but it was kind of a lot of these things that in terms of how men see themselves and how they react emotionally in situations, relationships and marriage and dating and again, yeah, in terms of possibly an unexpected pregnancy. So, and then the third part of that was repetition. So we'll have them go into their mind's eye, they're visualizing, and we'll ask questions from different angles, but they're basically the same question so that we can start to get like really valid data and making sure, because a lot of times what we notice with this very interesting approach to research is that at the beginning, a lot of times their filter is still up and they're saying things that they've kind of been conditioned to say. They're saying things that are politically correct or that they think sound good. And that's what happens a lot with like focus groups and sometimes even polling, depending on how it's asked. And so that's the beauty of kind of how the right brain research approach. So right brain meaning like where the creativity is, where the emotion is, rather than the left side where it's more analytical and you're answering, now again, both sides of the brain work, they interact all the time. And so when you hear somebody like, oh, I'm very right brain, you're very left brain, that in some ways that's true. Like there is certain functions that happened on the right hemisphere and certain functions that happen on the left hemisphere, but no one is just right brain or just left brain. It's always, working together. But we definitely, see like somebody who's an engineer or something like that is, they're more left brain, quote, or somebody that's very creative, an artist is more right brained, but anyway, with this process, we're using it's market research. So we're not, it's not really, it's like, so when we started working with the man who really conducted all of our initial studies, Dr. Charles Kinney, he was one of the world's leading consumer psychologists. And so he developed this approach of right brain research where he was basically trying to get at the emotional side of the brain for companies like Chevrolet and Maybelline and Nissan and American Express and Walmart. I mean, major Fortune 500 companies, McDonald's. And he was looking at like how emotionally they would react to the brand. And so that's important because early on, we had some supporters at Vitae to ask our founder, Carl Landwehr, if life was a product, how would you market it? And so he started thinking about that idea. And that's why Vitae kind of developed a little bit differently than a lot of other pro-life organizations. And he kind of developed out of a National Right to Life or Missouri Right to Life group in Missouri Catholic Conference. But then because Carl wanted to focus more on the idea of marketing life as a brand, he kind of gravitated towards Dr. Charles Kinney. And that's why all of our research from so going back 30 years, so Vitae kind of really, like I said, there was some versions early on, but I think officially was 1990. Oh shoot, I should know this, 92, I think. But at any rate, so going all the way back, Dr. Charles Kinney was the one that conducted these initial studies and developed this unique approach. And so we kind of, stole this approach that was used with Fortune 500 companies and branding, and we put it into the pro-life movement to try to understand a little bit about how this brand of life could be promoted and how like messages could be, just more effective based on the research through this kind of work. So that was probably more than you ever wanted to know about the background and the how we do the research and how the sausage is made, but now that you know that, I can jump into the results if you want,
Well, I
unless
have one.
any questions came up.
Yeah, I have one more question. So, do you find it that you need to use that approach more on men to tap into those emotions than you would a woman to go back there and feel and remember? I mean, I know women can go into denial, we can suppress our memories, and we can do all of those things. But do you use that approach on both men and women? And is it,
Yes.
is there a longer or different process for men?
That's a great question. And I had not really thought of it until we were in the middle of this project with the men. and realized that, yes, it is a little bit more difficult to kind of pull this out of men sometimes because it's emotional, and again, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but it tends to be that men are, kind of maybe at least on the surface, less likely to just share emotions, very easily or quickly. So it was really important that and I think we did probably find that it was more difficult to kind of pull that out of men than with women. But as you alluded to at the beginning, we had done a couple of studies with males. I say males just because one was with adolescents, and so they were really boys, 13 to 18, and then we had done well, and that was boys and girls, so adolescents, boys and girls, 13 to 18, and then we did one other study with what we called emerging adults, and that was young men and women ages 18 to 24. And so we had some experience with that. And Dr. Kinney always likes to talk about the fact that with this process, what we're looking for is we're looking for similarities and commonalities between the respondents. So we're not really looking for like, how is a Hispanic man different than an African American man or something like that. We're looking for the commonalities between them because of this emotional, it's kind of like the idea of that, everybody's going to react very similarly in terms of in a emotion, like in a traumatic situation. Like, you could have like, 10 different women in a rowboat at sea, and their baby falls out of the rowboat. Well, it doesn't matter whether they're black, white, Hispanic, 45, 25, they're going to, jump in and grab, they're going to have a similar, situation or similar reaction and emotional response, and maybe the actual physical response might be different. But so I didn't give a very good example of jumping in and grabbing the baby, although I think of that immediately, but emotionally they're going to react and respond similarly. And so, with this process, I think what Dr. Kinney would say is that with men and women, like, I think they might have found some differences sometimes when they would do like, a research study for McDonald's customers or something like that. But they're again looking for the commonalities between them and not looking for like, oh, how do men respond differently than women? Well, in this study, we interviewed all men, so we wouldn't really be able to compare like differences between men and women anyway. But what I noticed, to your question, is that it was different compared with men in this study compared to like it being just a little bit easier for women to kind of fall into this, right brain approach where they're visualizing and they're very willing to, kind of like respond emotionally to the questions that we're asking, whereas men maybe took a little bit longer. And I kind of started to say this earlier, where at the beginning, they would say kind of things that they thought they should say. And then as we got deeper into the interview and we peeled back those layers and we helped get like kind of remove that filter, all of a sudden, like, for example, at the very beginning, one of our major findings was that a lot of men, and no matter which of the three groups we talked to, the most common thing that we heard was, well, it's her decision, it's her body, it's her choice, and so we heard that constantly over and over and over again. But as we got through the interview, a lot of times, then all of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, that's true, but it really should be that I have some say. Is like, I know I have influence on her decision. So like, it shouldn't be that the law is that I have no
Take
legal
what I have to say.
standing, here, or even, they would acknowledge that, like, yes, she was. And again, not all of them. I mean, some of them, talked to us that the woman had an abortion and they didn't even know about it till long after it had happened, tragically. But the more common situation was that the woman told him and wanted his, opinion, and he knew that he had some influence with her there, and he either kind of abdicated that or didn't, sometimes. But I guess the point is that a lot of times, by the middle of the interview or by the end of the interview, even men who would never get out of, well, in the end it's her choice, even they would say, but there should be some sort of communication and like conversation where, and ideally it would be a mutual decision between the two, because, and they would always go back to, because it takes two to tango, and so they like go back to like, well, the baby was created with two, so there really should be two that makes the decision. And so very interesting that at the beginning, it was just like they would say, what they thought they should say. And that's like, I was there just to support her no matter what she needed, and it's her right. It's her decision. They talk a lot about the fact that she had to carry the child through all 9 months and had to deal with all the labor and had to deal with the morning sickness and all of the difficulty that comes with pregnancy. And so they would just then say, and because of all of that, then it really is her decision. But,
Called we kind of call it cultural brainwashing or something.
yeah, yeah.
But Mary, I'm sorry, did you have something, Mary? Oops, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Are you muted?
Yes, I was muted. I'm sorry. I was just looking at the time, thinking that maybe we would save those 5 special points for the next part if our guest could stay on and we could do another part. What are you thinking, Molly?
I'd be happy if you have time, Jeff, to continue this in a follow-up.
Yeah, I realized I kind of blabbed on and on about the groundwork for the research and didn't ever get to that part. So I'm happy to do that. Yeah, I appreciate you
But
taking a little extra time to
it's
hear
good.
about it.
It's all good stuff, but I guess, want to close this, and haven't done any formal research on this. It's just something that I've observed all of my life. I grew up in an officer's home, so I grew up in the military. We traveled everywhere. We interacted with all kinds of people from all kinds of either different states or countries. And one thing I observed as a young child that's carried all the way through till my adulthood is that there's only two kinds of people. There's men and there's women. God created men
Yeah.
a certain way and he created women a certain way. And so, you know, when you do your research, we may have different cultural backgrounds. We may have different languages. Like you said, we might have different religious beliefs, but a man has been created the same way and a woman's created the same way. And so, we process information, we react different ways. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to throw that in because I felt it was kind of, to me, like, wow, that's pretty interesting. As a woman, I can relate to any woman in the world. And as a man, you can relate to any man in the world. Different language, but, But anyway, I just thought that was pretty neat, especially when it comes to research. And there are different ways that men process feelings and emotions and how to tap into those. It's a little bit more challenging probably on the normal side. And women, like you said, if you can tap into that right side of their brain, probably a little bit easier. Of course, we all have defense mechanisms. We can all keep our walls up and be afraid and not want to go there. But I thought your approach to how to get them to tap into those feelings and memories was really pretty interesting, to get them to go back to that place in their mind's eye and to refeel and to revisit that, which I avoided for years. I don't know about you, Mary. But anyway, so let's just tell our viewers and our listeners that now that we understand how this research was done and the importance of this research and the different groups we had, men who were ambivalent or who, when they had the unexpected pregnancy, left the whole decision up to the mother of their child and was going to support them one way or the other, whatever you want to do. Like you just said, I'm going to support you because you have to carry the child. And then the second group was men who either strongly felt excited about the pregnancy, excited about the prospect of becoming a father, was very supportive of the mother. And then there's the same opposite or the polar opposite of that, men who probably were afraid and uncertain, but they strongly encouraged her to have an abortion. They were not supportive. And then the third group was men who've never experienced an unexpected or unplanned pregnancy. So those were the groups that you researched and you use. Do you have a name for that method of how?
Yeah, just it's right brain research or right brain methodology.
Okay, right brain research. And so when we come back, and I encourage y'all to tune in again for the best part, which is the 5 surprises, I guess, that Jeff came out with, during this research. And that's what we want you to be sure and tune in and watch part 2 of the series. So, Mary, do you want to give a closing?
Yes, we just hope you're listening and understanding. This is kind of a complicated issue. So this is a new way of looking at this. So stay tuned for part 2.
And I just want to close with giving, if you want to check out any kind of abortion recovery resources that are out there, if you're listening and you've been triggered or you've had an abortion in your past and you haven't dealt with it, you can go to operationoutcry.org. And that website has a list of all kinds of abortion recovery programs for men and women. And you can contact them, and most likely there's one in your area. And Mary, if you want to give the helpline number, then we'll close out.
Okay. Yes, that number is 866-721-7881. Please call if you've had any reaction or any response, even to the discussion of the topics that were covered in the research.
That's right. And everyone on those lines and on those calls, they have had an abortion in their past and they've gone through abortion healing, and they are there to listen to you and to help you. So thank you for tuning in to More to the Story with Molly White. We look forward to seeing you for part 2. See you then. Bye-bye.